2 days ago, something happened that most people aren't fully grasping yet. On January 3rd, 2026, U.S. Special Operations Forces landed in Caracas, Venezuela, and arrested a sitting president, not a former president, not a dictator who fled. A current head of state was taken from his presidential palace, flown to the United States, and is now in federal custody facing drug trafficking charges. This isn't normal. This doesn't happen. And whether you care about international politics or not, what happened in Venezuela 48 hours ago is going to affect your wallet, your investments, and the price of everything you buy. So before you click away, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because Money Aftermath is about to break down the single most important geopolitical event of 2026. And I promise you, no one else is connecting all the dots the way we're about to. Let me start with what we know for certain. At approximately 3:47 a.m. Caracas time on January 3rd, U.S. Military Special Operations Forces conducted a raid on multiple locations in Venezuela's capital. The primary target was President Nicolás Maduro, who has led Venezuela since 2013. Within hours, Maduro was in U.S. custody, being transported on a military aircraft to face charges in a U.S. federal court. The official statement from the White House was clear. They called this a law enforcement operation, not an invasion. They pointed to a 2020 federal indictment charging Maduro with narco-terrorism, drug trafficking, and conspiracy. According to U.S. prosecutors, Maduro has been working with Colombian drug cartels, specifically the FARC, to flood the United States with cocaine. The administration argued this was about bringing a criminal to justice, about protecting American communities from drugs, about upholding the rule of law. But here's where it gets complicated. Because while those charges are real and the indictment exists, the method of arrest is unprecedented. This wasn't an extradition. This wasn't a negotiated surrender. This was a military operation on foreign soil to remove a sitting head of state. And that raises questions that go far beyond drug trafficking. Let me give you the immediate reactions, because they tell us a lot. China issued a statement within 6 hours calling the operation an illegal invasion and demanding Maduro's immediate release. Russia called an emergency UN Security Council session and introduced a resolution condemning the U.S. action. That resolution was vetoed by the United States, but here's what's significant. The vote was 14-1. 14 countries voted to condemn the operation. Only the U.S. voted no. Even traditional American allies like France and the U.K. abstained rather than support the action. The UN General Assembly held an emergency debate 2 days later. 147 countries voted for a resolution calling the operation a violation of Venezuelan sovereignty. Only 5 countries, including the United States, voted against it. This isn't just controversial. This is one of the most internationally condemned U.S. military actions in decades. So we have to ask the obvious question. Why? Why would the United States conduct an operation that they knew would result in global condemnation? Why would they risk international relationships, UN censure, and accusations of violating international law? Is it really just about drug trafficking? To answer that, we need to understand what Venezuela represents economically. And if you're still watching, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from, because this affects the entire global economy, and I want to know how aware people around the world are about what's happening. Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves on the planet. We're talking about 303 billion barrels of oil. That's more than Saudi Arabia, more than Russia, more than Iraq. For context, the entire United States has about 69 billion barrels in proven reserves. Venezuela has 4 times that amount. This is not a minor oil producer. This is one of the most resource-rich nations on Earth. For decades, Venezuela was integrated into the global oil market in a very specific way. They sold oil primarily to the United States. In the early 2000s, Venezuela was supplying over 1.5 million barrels per day to American refineries in Texas and Louisiana, and every single barrel was purchased in US dollars. This is important, and we'll come back to why in a moment. But then something changed. In 1999, Hugo Chavez was elected president of Venezuela. Chavez was a former military officer who ran on a platform of economic nationalism. He looked at Venezuela's oil wealth and asked a question that many resource-rich countries eventually ask. Why are we selling our natural resources primarily to one customer at prices they influence, when we could diversify our customers and maximize our leverage? Chavez began making moves that alarmed Washington. In 2000, he visited Iraq and met with Saddam Hussein during the sanctions era. He announced Venezuela would trade with Iraq using barter systems, not dollars. In 2005, he began selling oil to China under long-term contracts that were repaid not in dollars, but through Chinese infrastructure investments. By 2008, Chavez was openly calling for the creation of alternatives to the US dollar in international trade. When Chavez died in 2013, Maduro continued these policies. Under Maduro's leadership, Venezuela deepened economic ties with China, Russia, and Iran. They negotiated oil sales in yuan, in rubles, through barter arrangements. By 2025, according to various estimates, Venezuela was conducting billions of dollars worth of oil transactions in currencies other than the US dollar. Now, here's where we need to talk about something called the petrodollar system, because this is central to understanding what might really be happening. The petrodollar system emerged in the 1970s. Essentially, it's an arrangement where oil, the most traded commodity on Earth, is primarily priced and sold in US dollars. This creates enormous demand for dollars globally. If you're Japan and you need to buy oil from Saudi Arabia, you need dollars to do it. If you're India buying from Iraq, you need dollars. The system has given the United States extraordinary economic advantages for 50 years. Because there's constant global demand for dollars to buy oil, the US can run large trade deficits, print more currency, and borrow money at lower interest rates than would otherwise be possible. Countries hold dollar reserves because they need them for energy purchases. They buy US Treasury bonds as a place to store those dollars. This creates a cycle where global oil trade props up demand for US dollars and US debt. But what happens if major oil producers stop requiring dollars? What happens if China can buy Venezuelan oil in yuan? If India can buy Iranian oil in rupees? If Russia demands rubles for its energy exports? The short answer is that global demand for dollars would decrease. And if demand for dollars decreases, the value of the dollar falls, interest rates rise, and the US loses economic leverage. Some analysts argue that the Venezuela operation was primarily motivated by concerns about this system. They point to a pattern. Iraq, under Saddam Hussein, announced in 2000 that it would sell oil in euros instead of dollars. The US invaded in 2003. Libya, under Gaddafi, proposed creating an African gold-backed currency for oil sales. NATO intervened in 2011. Iran has been selling oil in non-dollar currencies for years and faces some of the harshest sanctions in the world. Russia began demanding payment in rubles and faced coordinated Western financial warfare. The pattern, these analysts argue, is clear. Countries that challenge dollar dominance in oil markets face intervention. Is this interpretation correct? That's genuinely debatable, and honest experts disagree. But it's a perspective that explains why the US would take such a controversial action that clearly harms diplomatic relationships. There are other perspectives we need to consider, though. The drug trafficking charges against Maduro are not fabricated. The U.S. indictment details specific allegations, including that Maduro conspired with the FARC to use Venezuelan territory and resources to traffic cocaine to the United States. According to the DEA, Venezuela has become a major transit point for South American cocaine heading to North America and Europe. Some estimates suggest 250 tons of cocaine per year move through Venezuela. Supporters of the operation argue this was legitimate law enforcement. They point out that Maduro's government has been credibly accused of massive human rights violations, that Venezuela's economy collapsed under his leadership, leading to millions of refugees flooding neighboring countries, and that the Venezuelan people have suffered enormously. From this perspective, removing Maduro was both legally justified under the drug trafficking indictment and morally justified given the humanitarian situation. There's also a third perspective focused on regional stability. Venezuela's collapse has created one of the largest refugee crises in the Western Hemisphere. Over 7 million Venezuelans have fled the country since 2014. Colombia alone hosts over 2 million Venezuelan refugees. This has strained resources, created social tensions, and destabilized the region. Some analysts argue the U.S. operation was primarily motivated by a desire to stabilize Venezuela, restore its economy, and stop the refugee flow. So, which perspective is correct? Here's the honest answer. We don't know, we may not know for years. International relations are complex, and major decisions are rarely made for a single reason. It's entirely possible that drug trafficking concerns, oil politics, and regional stability concerns all played a role. Decision makers in government aren't always acting on one clear motive. They're balancing multiple interests, pressures, and goals. What we can analyze are the consequences. And this is where things get really interesting for your money, your investments, and the global economy. Because regardless of why the US did this, the effects are already rippling through global markets. Oil prices spiked immediately. On January 2nd, oil was trading around $74 per barrel. By January 5th, it hit $89 per barrel. That's a 20% increase in 3 days. Why? Market analysts point to several factors. First, there's uncertainty. Markets hate uncertainty, and a U.S. military operation in a major oil-producing country creates massive uncertainty about future supply. Second, there's concern about retaliation. If countries like Russia or Iran respond with their own actions, that could disrupt global oil flows. Third, there's the risk premium. Oil-producing countries are now factoring in geopolitical risk when pricing their oil. What does this mean for you? Higher oil prices translate directly to higher gas prices. If oil stays at $90 per barrel, You can expect gas prices to rise by roughly 30 to 40 cents per gallon within weeks. Everything that gets transported by truck, which is most consumer goods, becomes more expensive. Airlines raise ticket prices. Shipping companies raise rates. Those costs get passed to consumers. Currency markets reacted in an unexpected way. Normally, when the U.S. projects military power, the dollar strengthens because investors see the U.S. as asserting dominance. But this time, the dollar weakened slightly against major currencies, while the Chinese yuan actually strengthened. Currency traders I've spoken to suggest this reflects concerns about how the operation will affect international confidence in the dollar-based system. Now, I want to be really clear about something, because this is where a lot of financial content goes wrong. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that oil is definitely going to hit $150 per barrel, or that gas will be $8 per gallon by next year, or that the dollar is going to collapse by 25%. Those are predictions, and anyone making specific predictions like that is speculating, not analyzing. Markets are complex. There are too many variables. We don't know what will happen next. What we can do is look at scenarios and probabilities. So let's walk through some possibilities and what they might mean for your financial planning. Scenario 1, stabilization. In this scenario, the new Venezuelan government quickly stabilizes the country. Oil production increases as U.S. companies return and invest in Venezuelan infrastructure. Within 6 to 12 months, Venezuela is pumping more oil than before, which actually pushes global oil prices down. The operation, despite controversy, leads to improved regional stability and increased oil supply. In this scenario, gas prices might actually drop from current levels, inflation pressure eases, and the global economy benefits from more abundant energy. Scenario 2, prolonged instability. In this scenario, Venezuela doesn't stabilize easily. There's resistance to the new government, continued unrest, and oil production doesn't recover quickly. Meanwhile, other oil-producing countries, concerned about being targeted, become more cautious in their dealings with the U.S. Some countries accelerate plans to diversify away from dollar-based oil sales. In this scenario, oil prices remain elevated, inflation stays high, and global economic growth slows. Scenario 3, retaliation and escalation. In this scenario, countries like Russia, China, or Iran respond with their own actions. Maybe Russia cuts energy supplies to Europe in protest. Maybe China dumps U.S. Treasury bonds to express displeasure. Maybe Iran ramps up actions in the Middle East that threaten shipping lanes. In this scenario, we could see serious disruption to global trade, sharp increases in commodity prices, and potential recession. Which scenario is most likely? Honestly, scenario 2 seems most probable to me. Complete stabilization seems optimistic, given Venezuela's economic collapse over the past decade. Full escalation seems unlikely because major powers generally avoid direct confrontation. But prolonged instability and gradual shifts in the global economic system? That seems plausible. If you're wondering what this means for your personal finances, let me give you some practical takeaways that don't rely on extreme predictions. First, energy prices are likely to be more volatile than usual for the next year. This isn't a prediction that oil will hit a specific price. It's recognizing that we've just added major geopolitical uncertainty to energy markets. If you're planning major purchases or considering an electric vehicle, now might be a time to seriously evaluate that decision from a cost savings perspective. Second, diversification matters more than ever. Whether we're talking about your investment portfolio, your income sources, or even your skill set, reducing dependence on any single system or assumption is smart. Some investors are looking at commodity exposure, some at international diversification, some at inflation-protected securities. The right answer depends on your individual situation, but the general principle of not having all your eggs in one basket is more relevant now. Third, stay informed but skeptical. You're going to see a lot of content, like what I'm creating right now, analyzing the situation. Some of it will be good analysis. Some will be fear-mongering designed to get clicks. Some will be selling you gold or crypto or whatever by predicting doom. My advice is to look for content that presents multiple perspectives, admits uncertainty, and doesn't make overly specific predictions. If someone is telling you exactly what will happen and exactly what you should buy, be very skeptical. Let me share some historical context that might be useful. Major geopolitical events rarely have the extreme immediate economic effects that people predict. After Russia invaded Crimea in 2014, many predicted catastrophic market consequences. Markets wobbled but largely recovered. After the U.S. killed Iranian General Soleimani in 2020, some predicted oil would spike to astronomical levels and war would follow. Oil briefly spiked, then normalized. After Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, there were predictions of complete economic collapse in Europe. Europe faced serious challenges, but not collapse. This isn't to minimize what happened in Venezuela. It's to provide perspective. Major events create volatility and uncertainty, but markets and economies are adaptive. People and institutions adjust. The world is more resilient than doom predictors suggest, but also more complex than optimists sometimes acknowledge. One thing I do think is worth watching carefully is how other countries respond over the coming months. Pay attention to whether major oil exporters like Saudi Arabia or Middle Eastern nations change their trading patterns. Watch whether there's any concrete movement toward alternative payment systems for oil. Monitor whether U.S. diplomatic relationships show strain with major trading partners. These would be signals that the global economic system is shifting in meaningful ways. Also watch the domestic political reaction in the United States. This operation was conducted under current U.S. leadership, but it's going to be debated extensively. Was it legal under international law? Was it wise strategically? Should Congress have been more involved in the decision? These debates will shape future U.S. foreign policy and economic strategy. Here's something most financial content won't tell you. We don't actually know how this ends yet. We're 3 days into a situation that will take months or years to fully unfold. Anyone claiming they know exactly what's going to happen is overconfident. What we can do is stay informed, think critically about different possibilities, and make reasonable preparations without panicking. If you're still watching at this point, I want to thank you. Seriously, this is complex material, and the fact that you're investing your time to understand what's happening instead of just reading headlines puts you ahead of most people. Make sure you're subscribed to Money Aftermath, because we're going to be following the situation closely as it develops. Hit that like button if you found this analysis helpful, and share this video with someone who needs to understand what's really happening beyond the surface level headlines. Let me address one more thing before we wrap up. You might be wondering, what does Money Aftermath think personally? What's my take on whether this was about drugs, about oil, about regional stability, or about maintaining the dollar system? Here's my honest answer. I think it was probably about all of these things to varying degrees for different people involved in the decision. Foreign policy decisions aren't made by one person with one motive. They're made by administrations with multiple agencies, advisors, and interests. What I do think is clear is that this operation reveals something important about the current state of global power dynamics. We're in a period of transition. The post-World War II order, where the U.S. was the undisputed economic and military superpower, is evolving. China has risen as an economic competitor. Regional powers have more leverage than they used to. The global system is becoming more multipolar. In this context, the Venezuela operation might be seen as an assertion of U.S. power during a period when that power is being challenged. Whether that assertion strengthens or weakens the U.S. position long-term is genuinely an open question. History will judge that, and history's judgment might take decades. For you as an individual, the key takeaway is this. We live in a more uncertain world economically and geopolitically than we did a generation ago. That doesn't mean catastrophe is inevitable. It means adaptability, diversification, and informed decision-making matter more than ever. Stay curious, stay skeptical of extreme predictions in either direction, and focus on building resilience in your own financial life. The Venezuela situation is a major event, and it will have consequences. But those consequences will unfold over time, and they'll be shaped by decisions that haven't been made yet by leaders around the world. The story isn't over. We're still in the opening chapters. I'm going to be creating follow-up content as this situation develops. We'll track the economic impacts, the diplomatic responses, and what it means for different sectors and investments. If there are specific aspects you want me to cover, leave a comment below. I read them all, and your questions help shape future content. Before you go, I want to hear from you. Do you think this operation was primarily about drug trafficking and law enforcement? Or do you think there were broader economic and strategic motives? There's no wrong answer. I'm genuinely curious what people's instincts are about this. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and let's have an actual discussion. The comment section is where some of the best insights happen. And one more thing, if you found this valuable, don't just watch and leave. Share this video. Send it to friends, family, coworkers who you think would benefit from understanding what's happening beyond the surface headlines. The more people who understand the complexity of these situations, the better decisions we all make collectively. This is Money Aftermath, where we dig deeper than the headlines to understand what events actually mean for your financial life. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video where we'll continue following this story and many others that affect your money. Stay informed, stay critical, and stay prepared.